Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me again here for another episode of Stvpett Reads Live in our Christian book series. We're continuing our reading and discussion of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Before we get started, let me just, I kind of had this little preface for all of these episodes for this book. So what I'd just like to say is C.S. Lewis is a product of his era. And what I mean by that is that he holds some views that we would consider to be unacceptable, prejudicial views, particularly in regards to homosexuality, as well as some views we would view as sexist about women. Now there is this idea going around these days that if anyone has ever expressed or done anything objectionable, then that somehow negates all things that they ever said or did. I do not hold to that, but I also do not hold with glossing over the truth. So I will read exactly as written. We are coming into the section of Mere Christianity that these are most likely to come up, which is the book 3, which is called Christian Behavior. I will read what is written on the page. If he expresses a view that is objectionable, we will discuss it afterwards. And I'll point out how it either does or does not align with the current views of society or the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church, such as it is. But that's just the kind of little preface warning. I believe that this book has a lot of very important or very good things that help you to think about Christianity, to understand C.S. Lewis's, how he got to Christianity from atheism. But also, I think it gives you a lot of food for thought if you already are a Christian. Just a way to kind of think deeper about your faith. And so, even though there are in here a couple of things that we would find objectionable, overall I think it's a good book, and so we will be reading it. Again, I won't gloss over or censor. I will read what he wrote, and if it is objectionable, we will discuss it at the end of the episode. So tonight we are reading, we're starting on book 3 called Christian Behavior. We have 2 chapters tonight, and the first one's called The 3 Parts of Morality, and we will get to that in just a moment. First, as you know, I like to start each episode with a poem. So this week I have chosen a poem by the very famous American poet Emily Dickinson. The name of this poem is Besides the Autumn Poets Sing. Besides the autumn poets sing, a few prosaic days, a little this side of the snow, and that side of the haze, a few incisive mornings, a few ascetic eves, gone Mr. Bryant's golden rod, and Mr. Thompson's sheaves. Still is the bustle in the brook, sealed are the spicy valves, mesmeric fingers softly touch the eyes of many elves. Perhaps a squirrel may remain my sentiments to share. Grant me, O Lord, a sunny mind, the windy will, thy windy will to bear. So that was a poem by Emily Dickinson. And now let us go ahead and begin with tonight's reading, which of course is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Again, we are on book 3, which is called Christian Behavior, and the first of the 2 chapters we'll be reading tonight, chapter 1 of book 3, is the 3 parts of morality. There is a story about a schoolboy who was asked what he thought God was like. He replied that as far as he could make out, God was the sort of person who is always snooping around to see if anyone is enjoying himself and then trying to stop it. And I'm afraid that is the sort of idea that the word morality raises in a good many people's minds. Something that interferes. Something that stops you having a good time. In reality, moral rules are directions for running the human machine. Every moral rule is there to prevent a breakdown or a strain or a friction in the running of that machine. That is why these rules at first seem to be constantly interfering with our natural inclinations. When you are being taught how to use any machine, the instructor keeps on saying, "No, don't do it like that." Because, of course, there are all sorts of things that look all right and seem to you the natural way of treating the machine, but do not really work. Some people prefer to talk about moral ideals rather than moral rules, and about moral idealism rather than moral obedience. Now, it is, of course, quite true that moral perfection is an ideal, in the sense that we cannot achieve it. In that sense, every kind of perfection is, for us humans, an ideal. We cannot succeed in being perfect car drivers or perfect tennis players or in drawing perfectly straight lines. But there is another sense in which it is very misleading to call moral perfection an ideal. When a man says that a certain woman or house or ship or garden is his ideal, he does not mean, unless he is rather a fool, that everyone else ought to have the same ideal. In such matters we are entitled to have different tastes, and therefore different ideals. But it is dangerous to describe a man who tries very hard to keep the moral law as a man of high ideals, because this might lead you to think that moral perfection was a private taste of his own, and that the rest of us were not called on to share it. This would be a disastrous mistake. Perfect behavior may be as unattainable as perfect gear changing when we drive, but it is a necessary ideal prescribed for all men by the very nature of the human machine, just as perfect gear changing is an ideal prescribed for all drivers by the very nature of cars. And it would be even more dangerous to think of oneself as a person of high ideals, because one is trying to tell no lies at all, instead of only a few lies, or never to commit adultery, instead of committing it only seldom, or not to be a bully, instead of being only a moderate bully. It might lead you to become a prig, and to think you were rather a special person who deserved to be congratulated on his idealism. In reality, you might just as well expect to be congratulated because whenever you do a sum, you try to get it quite right. To be sure, perfect arithmetic is an ideal. You will certainly make some mistakes in calculations, but there is nothing very fine about trying to be accurate at each step in each sum. It would be idiotic not to try, for every mistake is going to cause you trouble later on. In the same way, every moral failure is going to cause trouble, probably to others, and certainly to yourself. By talking about rules and obedience instead of ideals and idealism, we help to remind ourselves of these facts. Now let us go a step further. There are two ways in which the human machine goes wrong. One is when human individuals drift apart from one another, or else collide with one another and do one another damage by cheating or bullying. The other is when things go wrong inside the individual, when the different parts of him, his different faculties and desires and so on, either drift apart or interfere with one another. You can get the idea plain if you think of us as a fleet of ships sailing in formation. The voyage will be a success only in the first place, if the ships do not collide and get in one another's way? And secondly, if each ship is seaworthy and has her engines in good order? As a matter of fact, you cannot have either of these two things without the other. If the ships keep on having collisions, they will not remain seaworthy very long. On the other hand, if their steering gears are out of order, they will not be able to avoid collisions. Or if you like, think of humanity as a band playing a tune. To get a good result, you need two things. Each player's individual instrument must be in tune, and also each must come in at the right moment so as to combine with all the others. But there is one thing that we have not yet taken into account. We have not asked where the fleet is trying to get to, or what piece of music the band is trying to play. The instruments might be all in tune and might all come in at the right moment, but even so, the performance would not be a success if they had been engaged to provide dance music and actually played nothing but dead marches. And however well the fleet sailed, its voyage would be a failure if it were meant to reach New York and actually arrived at Calcutta. Morality, then, seems to be concerned with three things. Firstly, with fair play and harmony between individuals. Secondly, with what might be called tidying up or harmonizing the things inside each individual. Thirdly, with the general purpose of human life as a whole. What man was made for, what course the whole fleet ought to be on, what tune the conductor of the band wants it to play. You may have noticed that modern people are nearly always thinking about the first thing and forgetting the other two. When people say in the newspapers that we are striving for Christian moral standards, they usually mean that we are striving for kindness and fair play between nations and classes and individuals. That is, they are only thinking of the first thing. When a man says about something he wants to do, it can't be wrong because it doesn't do anyone else harm, he is thinking only of the first thing. He is thinking it does not matter what his ship is like inside, provided he does not run into the next ship, and it is quite natural, when we start thinking about morality, to begin with the first thing, with social relations. For one thing, the results of bad morality in that sphere are so obvious and press on us every day. War and poverty and graft and lies and shoddy work. And also, as long as you stick to the first thing, there is a very little disagreement about morality. Almost all people at all times have agreed in theory that human beings ought to be honest and kind and helpful to one another. But though it is natural to begin with all that, if our thinking about morality stops there, we might just as well not have thought at all. Unless we go on to the second thing, the tidying up inside each human being, we are only deceiving ourselves. What is the good of telling the ships how to steer so as to avoid collisions, if in fact they are such crazy old tubs that they cannot be steered at all? What is the good of drawing up on paper rules for social behavior if we know that in fact our greed, cowardice, ill temper, and self-conceit are going to prevent us from keeping them? I do not mean for a moment that we ought not to think, and think hard, about improvements in our social and economic system. What I do mean is that all that thinking will be mere moonshine unless we realize that nothing but the courage and unselfishness of individuals is ever going to make any system work properly. It is easy enough to remove the particular kinds of graft or bullying that go on under the present system. But as long as men are twisters or bullies, they will find some way of carrying on the old game under the new system. You cannot make men good by law, and without good men you cannot have a good society. That is why we must go on to think the second thing of morality inside the individual. But I do not think we can stop there either. We are now getting to the point at which different beliefs about the universe lead to different behavior, and it would seem at first sight very sensible to stop before we got there and just carry on with those parts of morality that all sensible people agree about. But can we? Remember that religion involves a series of statements about facts, which must be either true or false. If they are true, one set of conclusions will follow about the right sailing of the human fleet. If they are false, quite a different set. For example, let us go back to the man who says that a thing cannot be wrong unless it hurts some other human being. He quite understands that he must not damage the other ships in the convoy, but he honestly thinks that what he does to his own ship is quite simply his own business. But does it not make a great difference whether his ship is his own property or not? Does it not make a great difference whether I am, so to speak, the landlord of my own mind and body, or only a tenant, responsible to the real landlord? If somebody else made me for his own purposes, then I shall have a lot of duties which I should not have if I simply belonged to myself. Again, Christianity asserts that every individual human being is going to live forever. And this must be either true or false. Now, there are a good many things which would not be worth bothering about if I were going to live only 70 years, but which I had better bother about very seriously if I'm going to live forever. Perhaps my bad temper or my jealousy are gradually getting worse, so gradually that the increase in 70 years will not be noticeable, but it might be absolute hell in 1,000,000 years. In fact, if Christianity is true, hell is precisely correct technical term for what it would be, and immorality makes this other difference, which by the by has a connection with the difference between totalitarianism and democracy. If individuals live only 70 years, then a state or a nation or a civilization, which may last for 1,000 years, is more important than an individual. But if Christianity is true, then the individual is not only more important, but incomparably more important, for he is everlasting, and the life of a state or civilization compared with his is only a moment. It seems then that if we are to think about morality, we must think of all three departments: relations between man and man, things inside each man, and relations between man and the power that made him. We can all cooperate in the first one. Disagreements begin with the second and become more serious with the third. It is dealing with the third that the main differences between Christian and non-Christian morality come out. For the rest of this book, I am going to assume the Christian point of view and look at the whole picture as it will be if Christianity is true. The second chapter of Book 3 is called The Cardinal Virtues. The previous section was originally composed to be given as a short talk on the air. If you're allowed to talk for only 10 minutes, pretty well everything else has to be sacrificed to brevity. One of my chief reasons for dividing morality up into 3 parts, with my picture of the ships sailing in convoy, was that this seemed the shortest way of covering the ground. Here I want to give some idea of another way in which the subject has been divided by old writers, which was too long to use in my talk, but which is a very good one. According to this longer scheme, there are 7 virtues. 4 of them are called cardinal virtues, and the remaining 3 are called theological virtues. The cardinal ones are those which all civilized people recognize. The theological are those which, as a rule, only Christians know about. I shall deal with the theological ones later on. At present, I am talking about the 4 cardinal virtues. The word cardinal, by the way, has nothing to do with cardinals in the Roman Church. It comes from a Latin word meaning the hinge of a door. These were called cardinal virtues because they are, as we should say, pivotal. They are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Prudence means practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you are doing and what is likely to come of it. Nowadays, most people hardly think of prudence as one of the virtues. In fact, because Christ said we could only get into his world by being like children, many Christians have the idea that provided you are good, it does not matter being a fool. But that is a misunderstanding. In the first place, most children show plenty of prudence about doing the things they are really interested in, and think them out quite sensibly. In the second place, as St. Paul points out, Christ never meant that we were to remain children in intelligence. On the contrary, he told us to be not only as harmless as doves, but also as wise as serpents. He wants a child's heart, but a grown-up's head. He wants us to be simple, single-minded, affectionate, and teachable, as good children are. But he also wants every bit of intelligence we have to be alert at its job and in first-class fighting trim. The fact that you are giving money to a charity does not mean that you do not need to try to find out whether the charity is a fraud or not. The fact that what you are thinking about is God himself, for example, when you are praying, does not mean that you can be content with the same babyish ideas which you had when you were a 5-year-old. It is, of course, quite true that God will not love you any the less, or have less use for you, if you happen to have been born with a very second-rate brain. He has room for people with very little sense, but he wants everyone to use what sense they have. The proper motto is not, "Be good, sweet maid, and let who can be clever," but "Be good, sweet maid, and don't forget that this involves being as clever as you can." God is no fonder of intellectual slackers than of any other slackers. If you are thinking of becoming a Christian, I warn you, you are embarking on something which is going to take the whole of you, brains and all. But fortunately it works the other way round. Anyone who is honestly trying to be a Christian will soon find his intelligence being sharpened. One of the reasons why it needs no special education to be a Christian is that Christianity is an education itself. That is why an uneducated believer like Bunyan was able to write a book that has astonished the whole world. Temperance is unfortunately one of those words that has changed its meaning. It now usually means teetotalism. But in the days when the second cardinal virtue was christened temperance, it meant nothing of the sort. Temperance referred not specially to drink, but to all pleasures, and it meant not abstaining, but going the right length and no further. It is a mistake to think that Christians ought all to be teetotalers. Mohammedanism, not Christianity, is the teetotal religion. Of course, it may be the duty of a particular Christian, or of any Christian at a particular time, to abstain from strong drink, either because he is the sort of man who cannot drink at all without drinking too much, or because he is with people who are inclined to drunkenness, and must not encourage them by drinking himself. But the whole point is that he is abstaining, for a good reason, from something which he does not condemn, and which he likes to see other people enjoying. One of the marks of a certain type of bad man is that he cannot give up a thing himself without wanting everyone else to give it up. That is not the Christian way. An individual Christian may see fit to give up all sorts of things for special reasons, marriage or meat or beer or the cinema. But the moment he starts saying that things are bad in and of themselves, or looking down his nose at other people who do use them, he has taken a wrong turning. One great piece of mischief has been done by the modern restriction of the word temperance to the question of drink. It helps people to forget that you can be just as intemperate about a lot of other things. A man who makes golf or his motor bicycle the center of his life, or a woman who devotes all her thoughts to clothes or bridge or her dog is being just as intemperate as someone who gets drunk every evening. Of course, it does not show on the outside so easily. Bridge mania or golf mania do not make you fall down in the middle of the road, but God is not deceived by externals. Justice means much more than the sort of thing that goes on in law courts. It is the old name for everything we should now call fairness. It includes honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promises, and all that side of life. And fortitude includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Guts is perhaps the nearest modern English. You will notice, of course, that you cannot practice any of the other virtues very long without bringing this one into play. There is one further point about the virtues that ought to be noticed. There is a difference between doing some particular just or temperate action and being a just or temperate man. Someone who is not a good tennis player may now and then make a good shot. What you mean by a good player is a man whose eye and muscles and nerves have been so trained by making innumerable good shots that they can now be relied on. They have a certain tone or quality which is there even when he is not playing. Just as a mathematician's mind has a certain habit and outlook which is there even when he is not doing mathematics. In the same way, a man who perseveres in doing just actions gets in the end a certain quality of character. Now it is that quality rather than the particular actions which we mean when we talk of a virtue. This distinction is important for the following reason. If we thought only of the particular actions, we might encourage 3 wrong ideas. We might think that provided you did the right thing, it did not matter how or why you did it. Whether you did it willingly or unwillingly, sulkily or cheerfully, through fear of public opinion or for its own sake. But the truth is that right actions done for the wrong reason do not help to build the internal quality or character called a virtue. And it is this quality or character that really matters. If the bad tennis player hits very hard, not because he sees that a very hard stroke is required, but because he has lost his temper, his stroke might possibly, by luck, help him to win that particular game, but it will not be helping him to become a reliable player. We might think that God simply wanted obedience to a set of rules, whereas he really wants people of a particular sort. 3, we might think that the virtues were necessary only for this present life, that in the other world we could stop being just because there is nothing to quarrel about, and stop being brave because there is no danger. Now it is quite true that there will probably be no occasion for just or courageous acts in the next world, but there will be every occasion for being the sort of people that we can become only as the result of doing such acts here. The point is not that God will refuse you admission to his eternal world if you have not got certain qualities of character. The point is that if people have not got at least the beginnings of those qualities inside them, then no possible external conditions could make a heaven for them. That is, could make them happy with the deep, strong, unshakable kind of happiness that God intends for us. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 2 and the end of our reading for this evening. I'm going to give it a moment here and see if anyone wants to comment while I take a brief drink of water. Okay, not seeing anything, so I guess I'll kind of discuss this a little bit. There are a couple things here that I'm not sure I would say that I exactly disagree with, but I feel are could be misleading. So one of the things is he talks about the difference between totalitarianism, I think, and democracy. The idea that whether the state or the collective is more important than the person. This is very difficult. It is difficult because both things are true. The fact is that each individual is important, and that is why you'll often hear things in politics when people talk about someone or some group of people being left behind. In that they're talking about how the collective or the state has forgotten a certain individual or sets of individuals. And the truth is, it is a difficult tightrope to walk, because there are competing interests. What is good for one set of people is not necessarily good for another. So it's a very difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around. I would say that this goes back to his metaphor of the human fleet and not running into each other. The point is, we accept that we are individuals, that we are important in and of ourselves. But I would argue that we are called to show love and charity to our fellow man, and that often involves the tools of the state or the collective, and considering others to be more important than yourself. So it's kind of a really hard thing. I'm not exactly saying that he's wrong. I'm just saying that the way he puts it makes it hard to quite lock down on something there. The other thing I'd like to mention is he talked about justice, and he referred to justice as fairness. Again, the problem is, and don't get me wrong, obviously justice is a great virtue. And fairness in terms of equal treatment from a state or collective is important. You don't want to be prejudiced. You don't want to be sexist or racist. I mean, after all, the very first thing I've seen here that really seems quite a bit sexist is his, idea of the thing he comes up with a woman is her devoting her thoughts to clothes or to playing bridge or to her dog. That seems a bit sexist to me. I would say that man or woman, all of those things can occupy an intemperate portion of your life. And let me come back to that in a moment. I was talking about fairness, and what I mean is that we all have an innate sense of what is fair. But at the same time, there are certain things that we are called to as Christians, loving our neighbors, that essentially means that a good chunk of fairness doesn't quite hold. Fairness, some people refer to karma, a sort of balancing, someone. So what I'll mention is here in the U.S., for example, we are currently, in case you're wondering, the date is October 7th, 2020. We're currently in the middle of a fairly heated election, and before that, we've been in the pandemic time for several months, and there is a belief by a large portion of society. I'm neither endorsing or I'm neither agreeing or disagreeing with that belief. I'm just stating that there is this belief in a large portion of society that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, played down the virus, the coronavirus, or basically ignored it, didn't think it was important, didn't really care. There's of people who believe that. And so when last week the president himself became sick with a deadly virus, you would find people expressing some kind of joy or satisfaction or pleasure out of seeing this. And it seems fair. He dismisses the other people who are getting sick and dying, it seems fair that he gets it as well. But we're called not to do that. It may seem fair, it may seem like some sort of justice of the universe or something, but that's not the way it works. We should not rejoice in the misfortune of others. Someone else might say, yes, but if the shoe was on the other foot, if, say, President Trump's opponent in the election, former Vice President Biden, were to get sick with coronavirus, that the president would undoubtedly be mocking Vice President Biden. The point is that I would say here is this is part of being Christian, in that it doesn't really matter what the other person is going to do. It doesn't matter what they do or what you think they're going to do. You're called to act in a certain way. And you can't really control what the other person is going to do. That goes back to, he mentions in here somewhere, let's see, where is it? Under prudence. The fact that you're giving money to a charity does not mean that you do not need to try to find out whether that charity is a fraud or not. He's talking about prudence as a common sense, and I get that. And, I encourage you to use common sense and be prudent. I didn't really like that phrasing simply because, again, the way I see things is that, you're called to love your neighbors as yourselves, and what someone else is doing is not really affect what you should be doing. So there is a natural inclination. If you see someone on the street, a seemingly homeless person or a beggar or someone like that, and they're asking for money, there is an almost natural inclination that a lot of people have in society. That person probably isn't going to use it for food or shelter. If I give them money, they're probably going to use it for drugs or alcohol. And that is possible. That is a possibility. And so a lot of people, because of that, will choose not to give, not to try and help. And that is their justification for it. My argument is that in the end, what they do doesn't matter. What matters is what you are called to do. To your knowledge, that person is homeless and on the streets. So you should do what you can to help them. If that means giving them a couple dollars, or if that means, buying them a meal at a restaurant. Either way, you do what you can to help. Coming back to kind of the stuff I was talking about with the temperance, where he talked about temperance, he is very right that temperance has kind of been too molded to alcohol specifically, and he's right. While it may not be wrong for one person or another to do something, the things themselves are not evil or wrong necessarily. It is often, if you cannot control yourself, that it becomes wrong. And as he said, he talked about things, but I would say that, that's where I said he had a little bit of a sexist line there that bugged me. But I would say that all of those things, golf, clothes, playing bridge, pets or children, let me throw in work. A lot of people are almost addicted, so to speak, to work. They're, workaholics, and while that's normally used in a sort of joking way, it doesn't escape the fact that for a lot of people it really is a problem. They really are very almost intemperate in the way that they are obsessed with work. So there are a lot of things that can make you intemperate. So those are my thoughts for this evening. As I'm not seeing any other comments, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up a little bit. So let me just have a few notes here. If you'd been trying to watch my Stvpett Reads Horror episodes, I've been having a few computer trouble because those are pre-recorded things. I have to go through a video editing process. I've been having a little bit of computer trouble with that. I hope to have some of those back up this weekend. I apologize if you had been watching that and you have, and then now there hasn't been a few episodes when they were supposed to be. So again, my apologies for that. I'd also like to say that if you have been enjoying this on Mere Christianity, or if you've missed any of the episodes where we've been reading Mere Christianity, I'm putting a link now to the YouTube playlist where all of the episodes we have done so far on Mere Christianity are, you can find them. If you would like to see all of the books we have read, we've read a number of books, several Christian books. Let's see, Being Christian by Rowan Williams, Crazy Christians by Michael Curry, Being Disciples by Rowan Williams, and we also read We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And if I have pronounced that wrong, I apologize. The point is, we've had quite a lot of episodes of Stvpett Reads Live, and I'm putting a link now to a playlist which has all of those episodes. Tonight was the 23rd episode overall of our Stvpett Reads Live, and our 22nd episode of our specific Christian book series. So I encourage you to take a look at some of those if you have missed them. And I guess that is it for tonight. I hope some of you will join me on Saturday, October 10th, where we will continue reading Book 3 of Mere Christianity, and the next two chapters, chapters 3 and 4 of Book 3, which are titled Social Morality and Morality and Psychoanalysis. So those are the next two chapters, which we will be reading next on Saturday, October 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope you have a great weekend and join me again. It's not a weekend, sorry, great evening, and join me again. Thank you very much.